Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. I hope you're having a great Sunday and a good Lent. I'm going to be sharing with you The Passion of Our Lord, taken from The Golden Legend by Jacobus de Verogene. The Passion of Christ was bitter in its pain, scornful in the mockery it laid upon him, and faithful in its manifold benefits. The pain of the Passion was 5 kinds. The first was its shamefulness. It was shameful because it happened in a place of shame, namely on Calvary, where malefactors were punished. The mode was shameful because it was condemned to a most ignominious death, the cross being their instrument of punishment for thieves. Yet, shameful as it then was, the cross is now a sign of unbounded glory. As Augustine says, the cross, which was the shame and torture of criminals, now adorns the forehead of emperors. If God has conferred such great honor on an instrument of punishment, how greatly will he honor his servant? The Lord's passion was shameful because of the company in which he suffered. He was reckoned with thieves and robbers who were criminals to begin with, but later one of them, Dismas, who was crucified at Christ's right side, was converted, and we read in the Gospel of Nicodemus, and the other, Gesmus, on the left side, was condemned. Thus to one of the kingdom was given, and to the other torment. Ambrose says, the author of mercy, hanging on the cross, divided the gifts and obligations of mercy among different recipients. He left persecution to the apostle, peace to the disciple, his body to the Jews, his garments to those who crucified him, his spirit to his Father, a guardian to his mother, the Blessed Virgin, paradise to the good thief, hell to the sinners, the cross to penitent Christians. That is the testament which Christ made as he hung on the cross. The passion was painful, secondly, because it was unjust. Christ had done no wrong, and there were no deceit in his mouth. Therefore, what was done to him was done unjustly and caused him grievous pain. The principal charge unjustly brought against him were 3, that he forbade the payment of tribute, that he called himself a king, that he claimed to be the Son of God. In the answer of these 3 accusations, we, speaking for the Savior, make 3 responses on Good Friday when we sing, O my people, what have I done to you, etc., in which verse Christ brings up 3 benefits he conferred on them, delivering them from Egypt, guiding them into the desert, planting them as his fairest vine in a very good land, as if to say, you accuse me regarding the payments of tribute. Rather, you ought to thank me for freeing you of tribute. You accuse me because I called myself a king. You ought to thank me for the royal fare I provided for you in the desert. You accuse me of calling myself God's son. You should rather thank me for choosing you as my vine and planting you in a very good place. Thirdly, Christ's passion was painful because it was his friends who brought it upon him. The pain would have been more bearable if it had been caused by people who had some reason to be his enemies, or by strangers or foreigners, or by people to whom he had been in some way troublesome. On the contrary, he suffered at the hands of friends, of men who should have been his friends, of his kinsmen, people of the same stock from which he was born. Of both of these, Psalm 37 and 12 say, my friends and companions stand aloof from my plague, and my kinsmen stand afar off. And Job says, 19:13, my acquaintances, like strangers, have departed from me. My kinsmen have forsaken me. Then there were those upon whom he had conferred many good things. As we read in John 10:32, many good works I have showed you from my Father. For which of these works do you stone me? Bernard. O good Jesus, how kindly you have dealt with men. What great and superabundant gifts you have lavished upon them. What keen, bitter sufferings you have borne for them, harsh words, harsher blows, most harsh torments. The fourth pain resulted from the tenderness of his body, as David says, 2 Kings 23:23. In a figure of speech, he was like the most tender little worm of the wood. Bernard. O Jews, you are stones. You strike a softer stone, out of which the chime of mercy resounds and the oil of love gushes. Similarly, Jerome. Jesus was handed over to the soldiers to be scourged, and the scourges tore that most sacred body and the breasts in which God dwelt. The fifth pain sprang from the overall effect. It penetrated every part of his body. It smote all his senses. This pain was first of all in his eyes, because he wept, as Hebrews 5:7 says, with a strong cry and tears. Bernard. He was lifted on high, so that he might be heard over a greater distance. He spoke more loudly, so that no one could have an excuse for not hearing to his outcry. He joined tears to stir men's compassion. He also wept at other times and places, at the resurrection of Lazarus and over Jerusalem. In the first instance, he shed tears of love, so that some who saw him weeping said, "See how he loved him." John 11:35 and 36. In the second instance, they were tears of compassion, but the third time they were tears of pain. He suffered in his hearing when insult and blasphemies were leveled at him. They were aimed at four particular prerogatives of Christ. He possessed preeminent nobility because in his divine nature he was the son of the eternal King, and in his human nature he was of royal descent, so that as a man he was King of kings and Lord of lords. He possessed ineffable truth, because he is the way, the truth, and the life. And he also said of himself, "Your word is truth." John 17:17. The Son being the Father's speech or word, he had insuperable power, because all things were made by him, and without him nothing was made. And his was a unique goodness, because no one is good but God alone. Christ heard insults and blasphemies aimed at each of these prerogatives. Against his nobility they asked, "Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary?" Matthew 13:55. His power was derided. "It is only by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, that this man casts out demons." Matthew 12:24. And he saved others. He cannot save himself. Matthew 27:42. They said he was powerless, though he showed power enough to strike down his persecutors solely by the sound of his voice. When he asked, "Whom do you seek?" and they said, "Jesus of Nazareth," Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he." And they fell to the ground at once. Augustine. He struck at his hate-ridden, fearfully armed mob with no weapon but a word. He repulsed them, laid them low by the power of his hidden divinity. What will he, who did this when about to be judged, do when he comes to judge? What will he who was about to die be able to do when he assumes his reign? His truth was denied. You are bearing witness to yourselves. Your testimony is not true. John 8:13. So they called him a liar, whereas he was the way, and truth, and the life. Pilate did not deserve to know or hear this truth, because he was not judging Christ according to the truth. He did begin his judging on the basis of truth, but he did not abide by the truth. Therefore, he was worthy to raise the question about truth and not to hear the solution. Augustine gives another reason to explain why Pilate heard no solution to his question. It suddenly came to him that by Jewish custom, one prisoner was released at the Passover. So he went out abruptly, not waiting for a solution, And Chrysostom offers a third reason, namely that Pilate knew his question was so difficult that much time and discussion would be called for, whereas he was in haste to set Christ free, and so hurried out. We read in the Gospel of Nicodemus, however, that when Pilate asked Jesus, "What is truth?" John 18:38, Jesus answered, "Truth is from heaven. Is there no truth on earth?" Pilate retorted, "How could there be truth on earth?" Jesus replied, "When truth is judged by those who hold power on earth." As regards Christ's goodness, his accusers said that he was a sinner at heart. We know that this man is a sinner, John 9:24. Also, that he led people astray with his words. He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place, Luke 23:5. And more, he violated the law by his actions. This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath, John 9:16. He suffered throughout his body, thirdly, in the sense of smell. A strong smell of decay pervaded the place of Calvary, where dead bodies were left to rot. The scholastic history says that Calvaries properly means the bare human skull. Hence, because criminals were beheaded there, and mainly skulls were strewn about, it was called the place of skulls, or Calvary. Fourthly, he suffered in the sense of taste, when he cried out, "I thirst." They gave him vinegar mixed with myrrh and gall, so that the vinegar would make him die, and more quickly, and the guards would sooner be relieved of their watch. For it is said that the crucified died more quickly if they drank vinegar. The myrrh would also offer his sense of smell, and the gall his sense of taste. So Augustine says purity is given vinegar to drink instead of wine, and sweetness is drenched with gall. Innocence stands in for the guilty. Life dies for the dead. Fifthly, he suffered pain through the sense of touch. In every part of his body, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head, there was no soundness. Bernard says that he suffered in all his senses. The head that angels trembled to look upon is stabbed with clustered thorns. The face, more beautiful than the faces of the children of men, is befouled by the spittle of men. The eyes that outshine the sun are clouded over in death. The ears that hear the angels sing hear the taunts of sinners. The mouth that teaches angels is given gall and vinegar to drink. The feet whose footstool is adored, because it is holy, are fixed to the cross with a nail. The hands that shape the heavens are spread open and nailed to the cross. The body is scourged, the side is pierced with a lance. And what more is there? Nothing is left in him except the tongue, so that he could pray for sinners and commend his mother to a disciple. Christ's passion was painful, but it was also scornful in the mockery it visited upon him. He was mocked 4 times. The first was in the house of Annas, where he was blindfolded, slapped, and spat upon. Bernard, "Your lovely face, O good Jesus, that face that angels desire to look upon, they defiled with spittle, struck with their hands, covered with a veil in derision, nor did they spare it bitter wounds." The second time was in the palace of Herod, who deemed Jesus a simpleton and of unsound mind because he refused to answer him, and draped him in white robe to make a fool of him. Bernard, "You, O man, are man, and you are crowned with flowers, and I, who am God, have a crown of thorns. You have gloves on your hands, and my hands have nails driven through them. You dance in white garments, and I, for your sake, was mocked when Herod clothed me in a white garment. You dance with your feet, and I have endured pain in my feet. You, in the dance, extend your arms like a cross in a gesture of joy, and I have had my arms stretched on the cross as a mark of opprobrium. I have borne pain on the cross, and you take pleasure in shaping a cross with your arms. You uncover your chest and side as a sign of vainglory, and my side was pierced for you. But return to me, and I will welcome you." But why did the Lord, in the course of his passion, remain silent before Herod, Pilate, and the Jews? We see three reasons for this. First, they were not worthy of hearing an answer. Second, Eve had sinned by saying too much, and Christ willed to make satisfaction by saying nothing. And third, no matter what he said, they would have distorted and perverted it. Christ was mocked a third time in the house of Pilate, where the soldiers wrapped a scarlet cloak round him, put a reed in his hands, and a crown of thorns on his head, and bending the knee said, "Hail, King of the Jews." We are told that the crown of thorns was plaited of furs, the thorns of which are very hard and penetrate deeply, whence it is thought that this crown drew blood from his head. About this, Bernard says, "That divine head had clusters of thorns driven into the brain." There are three opinions about the principal seat of the soul in the body. It may be in the heart, since, according to Matthew 15:19, from the heart come forth evil thoughts, or in the blood, according to Leviticus 17:11, the life of all flesh is in the blood, or in the head, since, according to John 19:30, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. It would seem that these three opinions were known to man, at least to judge by what they did. In order to tear his soul from his body, they sought it in his head by driving thorns all the way into the brain, looking for it in his blood by opening the veins in his hands and feet, and tried to reach it in his heart by piercing his side. In response to these scornful actions on Good Friday, we kneel 3 times before unveiling the cross, singing, Hagios, Ho Theos, Holy God, etc., thrice honoring him who thrice was mocked for our sake. On the cross, Christ was mocked a 4th time. As we read in Matthew 27:41, the chief priests with the scribes and the elders mocked him, saying, "If he is the King of Israel, let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him." On this, Bernard says, at this time he exhibits patience more than ever, commends humility, fulfills obedience, shows perfect love. These are the 4 jewels with which the 4 parts of the cross are adorned: charity at the top, obedience on the right, patience on the left, and humility, the root of all the virtues, below. Bernard briefly sums up all that Christ suffered. As long as I live, I will remember the labors he put forth in his preaching, his fatigues in explaining, his vigils in prayer, his temptations while he fasted, his compassionate weeping, the snares set for him in arguments with his opponents, and lastly, in the insults, the spittings, the slappings, the derisive gestures, the nails, the reproaches. Now we come to the twofold fruits of the Lord's Passion, which can be described as threefold, namely the remission of sins, the granting of grace, the manifestation of glory. These 3 are indicated in the title placed over him on the cross. Jesus referring to the first of Nazareth, to the second, King of the Jews, to the third, because in heavenly glory we will all be kings. Augustine says of the fruits of the Passion, Christ blotted out all guilt, present, past, and future. Past sins by remitting them, present sins by holding us back from them, future sins by giving us grace to avoid them. On the same subject, Augustine also says, "Let us wonder and rejoice, love and praise and adore, because through our Redeemer's death we have been called from darkness to light, from death to life, from corruption to incorruption, from exile to the fatherland, from grief to joy." How beneficial to us the mode of our redemption was it clear for 4 reasons. It was most acceptable to God as a peace offering, most suitable for curing humanity's illness, most efficacious to attract humankind, and best adapted to accomplish the defeat of man's enemy. First, the motive of our redemption was most acceptable to God as a way of placating Him and reconciling us to Him. For, as Anselm puts it in his book titled Why God Became Man, there is nothing more painful or difficult than a man can do for God's honor than to suffer death voluntarily, and not for debt, but of his own free will, and no man can give himself more fully than by surrendering himself to death for God's honor. So we read in Ephesians 5:2, Christ delivered himself an oblation and a sacrifice to God for an odor of sweetness. Augustine, in his book on the Trinity, tells us how this sacrifice placated God and reconciled us with God. What could be so readily accepted as the flesh of our sacrifice, being made the body of our priest? Thus, since four things are to be considered in every sacrifice, to whom it is offered, what is offered, for whom it is offered, and who offers it. In this sacrifice, he who himself is the one mediator between the parties reconciling us with God by sacrifice of peace, could remain with him to whom he made the offering, could make those for whom he made the offering one in himself, and could himself be the one who made the offering and the offering he made. Speaking about how we were reconciled through Christ, the same Augustine says that Christ is the priest through whom we are reconciled, the sacrifice by which we are reconciled, God with whom we are reconciled, and the temple in which we are reconciled. Therefore, speaking in the person of Christ, he reproaches some who belittled his reconciliation. When you were an enemy to my Father, he reconciled you through me. When you were far from him, I came to redeem you. When you were astray in the mountains and the forests, I came in search of you, found you amidst the rocks and the woods, and gathered you up, lest you be torn to pieces by the swift teeth of wolves and savage beasts. I carried you on my shoulders, gave you back to my Father, labored, sweated, pressed thorns upon my head, exposed my hands to the nails, opened my side with a spear, was torn, I will not say by insults, but by so many torments. I shed my blood, I gave my soul to unite you closely to myself, and you separated yourself from me. We'll continue the rest of this reading on the Passion of our Lord from the Golden Legend next Sunday. I don't know if you could hear the thunderstorm in the background, but God's giving a little background noise to our reading. I hope you have a great Sunday, and thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.